Hello guys, and welcome to another video, and this video is going to continue the Keystone highlight series that I've been doing, and it's going to run all the way up to ExileCon. And this series aims to cover lots of different keystones and talk about the various mechanics and interactions of those keystones and how you can use them in various builds. And this particular video, we're going to be looking at Corrupted Soul. And Corrupted Soul is a timeless keystone passive skill. This means that it can be acquired by socketing a particular timeless jewel into your passive tree, and these jewels dominate passive skills within their radius, including keystones which will be transformed into a new keystone based on the type of the timeless jewel and the name that's attached to the jewel. Corrupted Soul is granted from the Glorious Vanity timeless jewel when it's in the name of Doryani. And this keystone can also be acquired by using the Replica Soul Tether Belt. This one drops from Grand Heist blueprints for replica and experimented items. And it's also obtainable from the unique shield Mahuzottl's Machination, although this one grants a bunch of other keystones which complicate its usage. So Corrupted Soul has two modifiers. 50% of non-chaos damage taken bypasses energy shield, and gain 15% of maximum life as extra maximum energy shield. First, let's talk about the downside. 50% of non-chaos damage taken bypasses energy shield. So by default, the chaos damage type fully bypasses energy shield, and every other damage type will interact with your energy shield normally if you have any, until it's depleted, and then damage will move on to your life. This modifier will make it so that half of all of the damage that you take from those damage types will now bypass your energy shield without interacting with it at all, and chaos damage will still fully bypass it. So 50% of all the damage you take from non-chaos damage goes directly to your life, and the other 50% will damage energy shield first if you have any, and then move on to your life. You can also take the energy shield mastery that prevents 30% of chaos damage from bypassing energy shield, which helps you even out the damage that you're taking. Now, this is one of the rare downside modifiers on a keystone which can actually be used as an upside, or at the very least, it doesn't really impose a significant downside on the large majority of builds. And the main reason for this is that builds that will typically use Corrupted Soul will often have decently sizable health pools to be able to largely benefit from the extra energy shield based on life from the keystone. And it's very rare that a build using Corrupted Soul will have more energy shield than life. So by splitting the damage that you're taking from non-chaos damage sources between your life and energy shield, you're not losing any efficiency in terms of protection from your energy shield, because your energy shield would still fully be depleted before your life would reach 0. And this begins to be an upside for your build if you're able to have a constant, reliable source of energy shield recovery, because the energy shield will act as an extension of your life pool against non-chaos damage, since you won't need to rely on energy shield recharge to kick in after you stop taking damage for a period of time. For this reason, the Inquisitor's Sanctuary and Pious Path Ascendancy notables have extremely strong synergy with Corrupted Soul. Sanctuary provides consecrated ground around you while you're stationary, which grants a chunk of life regeneration, and Pious Path allows that consecrated ground to linger for a while even after you move. But most importantly, this node also causes life regeneration to also recover energy shield. This modifier doesn't make regeneration modifiers scale with your energy shield instead of life like the Zealot's Oath keystone, but it instead mirrors your total life regeneration stat and also applies that stat as regeneration for energy shield. So for example, if an Inquisitor had 5,000 life and 2,000 energy shield with 500 life regeneration, this stat would also be applied in the same amount directly to energy shield as energy shield regeneration if that Inquisitor was using Pious Path. This is extremely beneficial for use with Corrupted Soul, because against non-chaos damage you've essentially massively increased your effective health pool by adding a big chunk of energy shield which also has reliable recovery. Therefore, by combining these Ascendancy notables with Corrupted Soul, its downside has effectively been transformed into an upside. And because non-chaos damage you take is being split evenly between your life and your energy shield, you've essentially doubled your actual recovery because of Pious Path. There's also the synergy here with Righteous Fire, because you'll be able to maintain Righteous Fire and keep both your life and energy shield topped off, while the boost to maximum energy shield provide increased base damage from the gem. But the Inquisitor Ascendancy isn't the only one that can take advantage of this keystone, because there's also the Divine Shield keystone which can be allocated from the passive skill tree. It's located on the far left of the tree, between Templar and Marauder. This Keystone prevents your energy shield from recovering above the amount of your total armor, but it also allows 3% of physical damage that is prevented from hits recently to be regenerated as energy shield per second. This has incredible synergy with Boneshatter, a skill which hits the user for physical damage and grants a trauma buff every time you use it, and deals progressively more physical damage based on how many trauma stacks you have. Builds using this ability will focus on being able to sustain many trauma stacks at once, and they'll use mechanics such as armor, endurance charges and other additional physical damage reduction, fortify and other things to largely mitigate the self-physical damage dealt to them. This will mean that they are preventing a lot of physical damage from hits, and because the damage is coming from the ability they are using, it's reliable too. With Divine Shield, this will translate into a strong energy shield recovery, and as long as you have good life recovery, which you should do if you're using a Boneshatter build, you'll be able to gain a large increase to effective health by using Corrupted Soul, whilst being relatively unaffected by the Keystone's downside. This is especially true for Juggernaut Boneshatter builds, as you can combo Divine Shield with the Untiring Ascendancy Notable, providing a huge amount of life and energy shield recovery from prevented physical damage. There are some other notable energy shield recovery options that you could consider as well, such as the Occultist's Vile Bastion node or the Necromancer's Essence Glutton. The Trickster also has access to the Soul Drinker Ascendancy Notable, which provides energy shield overleach. When used with Life Leech or another form of life recovery, this can combo very well with Corrupted Soul. They also have Polymath, which provides incredible recovery for both resources while mapping. And of course, if your build has a decent amount of evasion, you can make use of Ghost Dance, which will recover energy shield when you get hit. And while we're on the topic of energy shield recovery, we should also mention the Betrayal modifier that can be found on body armor and belts. This modifier regenerates energy shield while a rare or unique enemy is nearby, which means it will usually be active during the most dangerous encounters in the game, like against rares while mapping or in boss fights. The unveiled version of this mod grants 200 energy shield regeneration, while the crafted mod goes up to 150. The belt modifier can be scaled further using Catalyst too, so you can get up to 240 energy shield regeneration on an unveiled belt with 20% quality. So that's a great mechanic to utilise for energy shield recovery. And so, those are all great methods to have significant energy shield recovery that's not reliant on the recharge mechanic. And one other point to mention about this particular modifier that splits damage between your life and energy shield is that energy shield has an inherent stat which grants a 50% chance to ignore stuns as long as the damage was dealt to energy shield. And so, since you'll have energy shield more of the time because half of the damage you take is bypassing it, you'll have this stun prevention active more of the time as well. But this one isn't that significant because a lot of builds will try to find a way to gain full stun immunity anyway. Alright, so that was a whole lot about the downside of Corrupted Soul, which is secretly just an upside that's disguised as a downside. Of course, it is actually a downside which makes it pretty much unusable for low life builds which want to scale life and reserve it, like the use of the unique body armor, the Ivory Tower. But for most builds that use it, it's actually a benefit. But what about the actual upside of the Keystone? Gain 15% of maximum life as extra maximum energy shield. This modifier grants 15% of your total life pool as a chunk of energy shield, and this energy shield will then be scaled by any increases that you have to maximum energy shield. So for example, if you had a character that had 6,000 maximum life with 50% increased maximum energy shield, if you allocated this Keystone, you'd gain 900 energy shield, which would then be scaled by your 50% increased maximum energy shield for a total of 1,350 energy shield. So this is actually a very good way to gain a large amount of energy shield on a hybrid life and energy shield build. It's not uncommon to see builds using this Keystone to gain a very significant amount of energy shield. The Replica Soul Tether belt grants even more of this stat on top of the Corrupted Soul Keystone, and it scales with Catalysts too. So you can get a total of 22% of your maximum life as extra maximum energy shield from the belt slot alone, by using a max roll Replica Soul Tether with 20% quality. If you're using a Replica Soul Tether to gain the Corrupted Soul Keystone on a Pathfinder, you could then use your Timeless Jewel slot to acquire the Supreme Decadence Keystone, which is granted from an Elegant Hubris Jewel in the name of Kadiro. This Keystone will apply life recovery from flasks to energy shield too, which can be combined with Master Surgeon to gain recovery for both life and energy shield from your life flask constantly, similar to an enduring mana flask, although you will have to overcome the heavy penalty to life recovery from flasks on both nodes. You can also use Corrupted Soul with Eldritch Battery to gain a considerable resource pool to cast skills and use things like Divine Blessing auras, whilst also being able to fully reserve your mana pool. This can be especially useful on builds which may not use much of any energy shield gear, or builds on the lower side of the passive skill tree that use the Devouring Diadem unique helmet to gain Eldritch Battery. When using Eldritch Battery and Mind Over Matter with Corrupted Soul, 40% of the damage that you take to your life will be redirected to your mana due to Mind Over Matter, while your mana is being protected by your energy shield due to Eldritch Battery. Then, because of Corrupted Soul, half of the non-chaos damage taken to energy shield will directly bypass it and attempt to damage mana instead. In the usual case of these types of builds, mana will be mostly or fully reserved, and therefore the damage that bypasses energy shield and attempts to damage mana will then be dealt to life because you have no mana. This combination of mechanics will essentially cut the Mind Over Matter effect in half for builds that reserve most or all of their mana. This can still be useful as long as your total energy shield doesn't exceed more than 25% of your total life. And lastly, keep in mind that if you have good energy shield recovery, you can always make use of Frost Shield to further improve your defenses, whilst also granting a nice boost to spell critical chance if you're using spells. Overall, Corrupted Soul is a great keystone that grants a large amount of effective health when used in the correct builds, but it does compete with other very strong defensive options found on other Timeless Duel keystone passives, or the belt slot which can be used to gain many other useful stats. That's it for this one. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please do hit the like and subscribe for more content like this in the future, and if you really liked it, you can consider becoming a channel member by clicking the join button below this video. And as always, stay tuned and stay safe.